And then my last takeaway there, which I already said, all three companies are using more than one solution. I have another section here. I'll breeze through this in 2 minutes. So the point of this last section was Jacob and I basically have kind of given you a framework that we used and some of our some companies out there have used. The next step is you choose a solution or multiple solutions. Then you have to demonstrate, okay, to an auditor or internal auditor maybe, I have complied with Section 6.6. How do you do that? So we did a little research. We talked to some qualified security assessors, the QSAs. We talked to the people who train the QSAs. We talked to the PCI Council, and we asked them 3 questions. How do you demonstrate your application is protected against known attacks? How do you show that the user of that tool is appropriately trained? And how do you show that you've configured the tool appropriately? So before I show, well, I'll show the answers, but before I talk about the answers, nothing is definitive. I had to push and prod people from each one of those groups to give me definitive answers. Everyone wants to say it's all about intent. The QSA or your internal auditor has to feel comfortable that that application is secure. But I pushed them and I wanted some answers. So here's what I got. So how do you demonstrate your application is protected? Well, I want verification that the analysis has been done. Give me the date when it happened. I want a report showing that no critical security issues were identified. What does critical mean? Somewhat up to interpretation, but that's up to the QSA or your internal auditor to figure that out. And then a document showing, this one's more relevant for an application firewall, a document showing you how the tool fits in your architecture. Next, how do you show that the user of these tools is appropriately trained? Something simple, a document explaining prior experience of that person, or have an informal interview with the person. Third, how do you show that you configured the tool appropriately? PCI Council stresses that in the requirements. A document explaining how the tool was configured and what new rules you added would potentially suffice. Okay, so that's it. Last slide, just a summary. So PCI Section 6, it's evolving and it's becoming increasingly precise. We recommend you compare technologies across these nine criteria. And demonstrating compliance is an art. It's not a science, which makes it that much more important that you pick the right technologies and figure out how you can appropriately convince your auditor or a QSA that you are, in fact, securing those applications. So that's it. Thank you, everyone. And any questions, feel free to fire away.
Quick question. So we've noticed that PCI compliance does not necessarily mean specifically 6.6 equals security, because there are a few examples out there. The company was PCI compliant, and literally a week later was hacked and was successful hacks.
Yep.
So I just want to, I guess, ask for your take on subjectiveness, I guess, of the PCI audit. Because it seems like from QSA to QSA, there's a certain level of
I think the PCI standards is a great step forward. I think the tricky thing is they tried to come up with a set of standards that are equally effective for the Amazons of the world as they are for the small level 4 merchant that only makes few $1,000s a year. And it's very difficult to come up with a set of standards and enforce them across those 2 different types of organizations. So I think it's a great step forward. I think they're going to continue to struggle with making it more and more precise. But I'm all for it. I think it's great. I mean, I think Section 6.6 is great because it is prescriptive. It says you have to use one of these 3 solutions. But they also say, if you read the document very closely, they say you should use all 3, but we're only going to require that you use one.
I think it's also critical to consider that the job of the QSA or the internal assessor is to evaluate whether you've complied with the recommendations that PCI has laid out, not whether to evaluate whether your software is secure. So they're saying, have you complied with the guidelines? And we all should agree or not agree that those guidelines promote good application security and that they're a step in the right direction. But when the assessor comes back and says you comply with Section 6.6, it doesn't mean your application is secure. It just means that you've complied with those standards. I think we should take any more outside, probably, because we are out of time.
Okay. Thanks guys.